In the last video, you learned how to create variables with const, and I also told you it was the last video for this section. Clearly, that's not the case. Now, it was the case when the course first came out, but after the course launched, I got a lot of questions from students. They were seeing a third way to create variables on the web, and they noticed it wasn't covered in this course, and they were wondering why. So I've added this video after the fact to talk about this third way to create variables in JavaScript. This is a var-based variable. In this video, we're going to talk about exactly what they are, how they work, and why they're something we want to actively avoid. I didn't cover var in this course originally because it is not something we use in day-to-day development anymore, but it did play a big role in JavaScript in the past. So for the sake of completeness, I'm going to talk about exactly what it is and how it works. To kick this one off, let's go ahead and create a new file in the objects directory. Down below, I'm going to call this one var.js, and in here, we're going to mess around with this third type. If we want to make a variable with let, we start with let. If we want to make a variable with const, we start with const. The third type is to create a variable with var. Now, this is going to look pretty similar to what we've done already. After we set up the var keyword, we move on to naming the variable we're creating. Let's go ahead and call this one something easy like first name. Then we could choose to assign it a value if we wanted to. So right here, I could assign it a string value, for example, and I'll just use my first name. Now this should look pretty familiar based off of what we already covered in the course. And for the longest time, this was it. This was the only way we could create variables in JavaScript. There was no let, there was no const. Those are relatively new additions to the language. Now you might be wondering, why ever create a different way to make variables? Why did let and const ever need to get added to the language? And the reason why is that var has its own fair share of quirks and flaws, making it a less than ideal way to create variables in JavaScript. So let's go ahead and talk about the basics of var. At its core, var is pretty similar to let in the fact that we can reassign its value. For example, I can set first name equal to something completely new. I could set it equal to a string, a number, an object. In this case, I'm just going to set it equal to a different string value like Mike. This is perfectly valid, just like we've seen with let. Down below, let's go ahead and actually print first name to the console. So console.log, printing the first name variable. I'm going to say var.js and run things from the terminal. Node space var.js. When I run it, without surprise, we get Mike printing. So var got us by for a while. What I want to talk about now, though, are the differences between var and const let and why const let should be preferred. The first thing with var that we can do that we can't do with const and let is redeclare a variable that's already been created. So right here on line 4, for example, I can make a new var called first name exactly as we have it above, and I could set it equal to a different value like Jen, for example. Now we know that if this was created with let or with const, we would get an error saying we're trying to redeclare a variable that's already been created, but with var, it's perfectly fine. So if we go ahead and rerun the script, we can see that without complaining, the program is printing Jen. And that can be a pretty big problem. When we're creating programs that are significant with lots of different variables, it can be very easy to accidentally create a variable that already exists. With let and const, JavaScript lets you know and it crashes the program so you can change the variable name to something else. With var, JavaScript silently accepts what you've done, even if it might not be what you wanted to do. So in this case, we're none the wiser that we already had a first name variable that was created that accidentally got overridden. Now, obviously, in the context of a 6-line program, it's pretty easy to spot this, but if we had all sorts of different functions across multiple files, it can get really difficult to track down why some variable has had its value changed, even though you didn't think it would. So this is the first reason we want to avoid var. The next reason we want to avoid var is that var is function scoped, not block scoped. That means things like if statements, which create code blocks, don't actually create a new scope when working with var. Let's go ahead and explore that with an example. Up above, what I'd like to do is make an if statement. I'm going to replace the first 2 lines of the program with an if statement. If, our condition, our code block. And for the condition, let's just come up with something that's always going to pass. So I'm going to check if 10 equals 10. 10 is always going to equal 10, so the code inside of here is always going to run. What we're going to do is take our variable declaration and move it inside of the if statement. I'm going to cut it out right here, paste it in right here, and then we can see what our program actually does. If I save var.js, I can rerun things from the terminal. When I rerun them, what do we get? We get gen printing. So var has a function-based scope. If we don't create a new function, we don't have a new scope. Since we don't make a function anywhere in this file, everything is in the exact same scope, meaning that we do have access to first name down below, even though it was defined in the if statement. We know that with const or let, this wouldn't work. So const and let are both block scoped. This creates a new block, as do functions, so we know that we wouldn't be able to access first name. If I save the program in its current state and rerun things, this time we're going to get an error, reference error. First name is not defined. I prefer working with block-scoped variables as opposed to function-scoped variables because it gives me a lot more flexibility. I'm able to maintain fine-grained control over my scope. For example, if I'm working in an if statement and I want to perform some sort of private calculation inside of there, I can create variables using let or const that are specific to that local scope. If I have to do that with var, those variables get exposed outside of the if statement as well. Now let's go ahead and create a function to prove that we can at least get function scope with var. Right here, we can make a function const set name equals, I'll set up a brand new function. It does not need to take any arguments, and all we're going to do inside of here is create a variable using var. Var, first name, with a capital N of course, equals whatever value we want to happen to provide. I'll just stick with some sort of name. So right here, we can see that if we were to call set name, this line would indeed run, but we're still not going to be able to access that down below because var-based variables are function scoped. So the only thing that creates a new scope is indeed a function. If we save the file and rerun things from the terminal, we can see we are getting that reference error like we would with let or const. First name is not defined. So that covers two of the big differences. With var, we can declare the same variable twice. We just learned that var is function scoped as opposed to block scoped. The last big difference has to do with accessing a variable before it's declared. To mess around with this, let's go ahead and delete everything we have so far and look at some pretty strange behavior. Let's start with an easy one. We're just going to make a variable using let called age. I'm not going to assign it a value, and down below, we're going to log it. Console.log, printing age. Straightforward. We know that if we don't assign a value to a variable we declare, it gets assigned undefined behind the scenes. So in the end of the day, I would expect to see undefined printing, and that is exactly what we'll end up getting. I can run the file node var.js, and I see undefined printing. The exact same thing is true with a var-based variable. If I save the program swapping out let for var, we're going to see the exact same functionality. Nothing surprising there. What's interesting and why I want to explore this third difference between the two is what happens if we try to access a variable before it's been declared. To do this, we're going to swap these two lines. I'm going to take console.log and shift it up above. So now we are logging age, then after we log age, we're declaring it. If we were to run the program, we might expect some sort of error to print saying that age has not been declared, but if we actually rerun it with var in place, what do we get? We still get undefined. What's crazy though, if we swap out var for let, we are going to get the error we probably would expect. So right here, same program, just swapping out var for let. If I rerun things, we can see that age is not defined prints. So what exactly is happening here? When we create a variable with var, its declaration gets hoisted to the top of the scope. So in reality, the program we're running still looks like this. Now things get a bit more interesting if we actually assign it a value. So let's keep our log as the first line, and on the second line, I'm going to assign the var-based variable age a value like 10. We're going to save the program, rerun things, and what do we get? We don't get 10. We still just get undefined. So once again, it is the declaration of the variable that gets hoisted. So in reality, when we run a script like this, it really looks like this. We create the variable, then we print it, then down below, we assign it a new value. So this is pretty strange behavior that we're seeing with var, and it can be really confusing when we're working with variables in our scripts. To drive this point home, I just want to show you one last strange example of reordering these lines once again. I'm going to take the first line and move it to the last line. Then I'll take the old last line and I'll make that the first line. So now we're assigning age to 10. We're then printing age, and then down below, we're declaring the variable. If we save the program and rerun things, what do we get? We actually get 10 printing. So in this case, once again, the declaration right here gets hoisted to the top of the program. So the actual program we're running looks a bit more like this. So to summarize, if we try to access a var variable before it's declared, we get undefined. If we try to access a let or const variable before it's declared, we get a reference error, and that is probably the behavior we would expect. That's going to allow us to go back, find out why we're using variables before we're declaring them, and then fix our code to actually work. This is the only video in the entire course where we're going to talk about var. It's not something that I use anymore in JavaScript development, though once again, it was very important in the past. We now have better tools for the job though. So in this course, we're going to be sticking with let and const. I'm going to go ahead and delete this file from the objects directory. That is it for this video. I will see you in the next video, which is the section intro for arrays.